So, let's go around and table and share our most embarrassing moments.
I don't have an most embarrassing moment. I'll tell you everything.
Well, that's just because you're not embarrassed by anything. You have moments. To you, they're not embarrassing.
But I'm not embarrassed by them. Hey everybody, welcome to Live It Out Now. As you can see, it's a different setup this week. It's a little bit better. Anyway, we're talking about overcoming. Last couple of weeks we were talking about overcoming things like pride and other topics. This week we're talking about anxiety and how to overcome that. We're glad you're here.
Sweet. Okay. So remember our first part of DBS is just talking about life together, catching up, and just seeing how everyone is doing. So we're going to share our highs and lows from the week and also where we saw God this week. So, Sam, why don't you go first, buddy?
Yeah. So for me, again, it's going to be mission stay related. Everything I do right now is mission stay related. Highs and lows. Low of it, it's very time consuming. But the high of it is, getting people together, getting teens together, seeing them work together, and the amazing thing God is doing through that, like with money. We have seen the most money we have ever seen this year. And it's just crazy. Like through this COVID-19 stuff, through everything that's going on, people are more generous. And, it's just crazy to see people come out. We had our yard sale, like I talked about last week, but we had our yard sale, and people would just come up to us with $20 bills, and we're like, hey, I didn't see anything at the yard sale, but I really like what you guys are doing. I love that you guys are helping the community. Here's $20.
That's awesome.
And it's just really cool to see that, like, God is moving in that way, moving people to give us money and just blessing what we're doing here at Southwest. We're doing something right. So
that's awesome. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll go next. I'll share my high and my low. Actually, I'll basically just share all three because two of them go together. My high from the week is really easy. One of my teens, Erica is her name, she got baptized out at Camp Young Hill. It was awesome. A small little group, and we went out, and her dad baptized her. And it was just so awesome because she's one of our favorites, Rebecca and I, her family was like the first family to really have us over for dinner when we first got to Newburgh. And so we've been able to watch her and her two siblings grow up. And now to see her make this decision was just so incredible, and that's, where I saw God this week too, is not just in that moment, but to kind of step back for a second and just see how he is shaping her into this just amazing woman of God, and just to see how he's moved in her life and things like that. It's been really cool. So we love you, Erica. My low for the week, one of the unfortunate things about ministry is that sometimes you see really high highs like that, and sometimes you see, really low things all in 1 week, basically. And, without sharing too much detail, someone I know and love is just going through a really rough time, getting divorced and just having to deal with all of that. And it's just not fun to watch anyone, go through that. And so, been praying for her a lot, and just, and it's just not fun. It's not something you ever, want to see happen. And, just all the chaos around her life right now is just so tough. And so, unfortunately, that's something that happens in life, and that's why it's important to, have strong support system and stuff like that. So that's me, all three.
Yeah. My low, I probably won't share just because it's, it's a little more, it's more private, I suppose. But I definitely have had some challenges in the past week and a half. But what's been really great is that I got to visit with a lot of friends in the past week. A couple friends who were in from out of town, Ben and Lauren, I got to hang out with them. And I've just spent some time hanging out with friends that are local. And it's just been nice. It's been nice to spend time with people and, to just be with people. And that's really it. And then seeing God at work, yes, Erica's baptism was huge, but my favorite part, I think, of being on the outside but seeing those decisions being made by our teens is the way our teens always support and congratulate and encourage each other.
True.
So our youth group was all just so excited, and our primary interaction these days is through social media. But scrolling through our youth group Instagram message, I think
we've got a great Instagram thread.
Yeah, but it was just fun because, Kyle sent a video and was like, Erica was baptized. This is really great. And all of our kids are like, congratulations. Like, that's so great. That's wonderful. And I just love that, seeing them encourage and uplift each other and celebrate each other.
Yeah, it's really cool. I got to share one more high, actually. This is just for fun. But Rebecca and I took our dog. His name's Asher. He's like a year and a half. He's a black lab. We took him to the beach for the first time, and he was swimming in the ocean, and it was just like the most wonderful thing to see, to watch him like just dive in the ocean and start swimming. He's never seen like the water before like that, but he knew exactly what to do, and he was like trying to chase after seals and stuff. It was hilarious, and he was like zonked by the end of the day.
Did he try to drink the water?
He did.
Yeah.
And
Our
luckily
dog
he
always-
didn't throw up.
Our dog always goes and like drinks
Yeah.
the water and is like,
It was so funny.
We're going to have
though.
to take both our dogs. I just took Chandler the other day, and she used to avoid the water and hate it, but this time she got really excited and just followed Lauren in, was like up over her back, and she was having a blast, which was really fun for me.
It was, oh man, it was just the coolest thing to watch him
awesome.
swimming in the water. It's hilarious.
do you have a video of it?
Doggos.
I do, yeah. Maybe we'll throw a little up there or something. It's pretty funny.
Okay, so today we're looking at overcoming anxiety as a part of our Overcome series, and our passage is Philippians 4 through 13. So I'll read that, and then Sam will retell it to you in a different way. I can make sure to start in the correct spot. Okay. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again I say rejoice. Let everyone see your gentleness. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. Instead, in every situation, through prayer and petition with thanksgiving, tell your requests to God. And the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is worthy of respect, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if something is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. And what you learned and received and heard and saw in me, do these things. And the God of peace will be with you. I have great joy in the Lord, because now at last you have again expressed your concern for me. Now I know you were concerned before, but I had no opportunity to do anything. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content in any circumstance. I have experienced times of need and times of abundance. In any and every circumstance I have learned the secret of contentment. Whether I go satisfied or hungry, have plenty or nothing, I am able to do all things through the one who strengthens me. Nevertheless, you did well to share with me in my trouble.
Awesome. Thanks.
One verse far.
That's
Actually,
all right.
that fits pretty well with this section. I don't know why I stopped it early.
So this is about being able to do sports and doing sports well. That's a joke because Philippians 4:13 is often used for that.
Right. It's about finding a good parking spot
Yes.
at the mall.
Yes. I can do all things through Christ who
Yeah.
strengthens me. Anyway, what this really
About
is
raising teenagers.
Yeah. What this really is about is Paul. Paul is talking about the highs of life and the lows of life. And where he is. It's thought to be that Paul is in prison during this time. And that he's talking from a place of very low, a very, very low. And so what he's talking about is just whatever you're doing, give thanksgiving to God, give it all to God. I mean, he says in verse 6, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And this is a part that I really love. Verse 7 is probably one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible, is that, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So what he's talking about again is just this idea of like, whatever you're going through, whether that's the high of life, whether that's the low of life, and we're talking about anxiety this week. And so if you're anxious about anything, lift it up to God. You know, and then he gets to the pinnacle where we proof text and take Philippians 4:13 out of context, is that he's talking about, you know, this high of life, this low of life, but it doesn't matter if you're in the high of life or if you're in the low of life, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. And it's not about finding a parking spot. It's not about sports. It's not about any of that stuff. It's about giving it to God, and God will take care of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, we picked this verse to talk about anxiety because it does talk about anxiety and kind of just a general way to approach it. But it, you know, he also talks about like other things to dwell on, to focus on, things that are good and pure and lovely. And then he talks about one of his own situations where, you know, like Sam said, whether he's been in the high of life or the low of life, Paul can learn to be content. And I think all of these things have something to say about anxiety and things that make us anxious. So we're going to get into our questions here. One thing I do want to say before Sam introduces that is, you know, on some of these topics, we want to be careful about how we talk about these things. Anxiety is something that all of us experience, right? I mean, to one degree or another. But there's also a form of anxiety that's more clinical, you know, and, you know, we want to be careful about that. Some people really struggle with anxiety in a more medical way. And so we don't want to negate, you know, seeking good care from like a health provider or something like that. But we do want to approach this topic from a spiritual perspective. I don't know, Nikki could probably say a lot of that much better than I could, but...
well, kind of what you're touching on is just, we're not saying that if you have an anxiety disorder,
yes,
you know, you don't get medical or, you know,
just read
professional
the Bible.
Treatment for that, you just pray it away. That's not at all... That's not what we're saying. That's not what I believe this passage says either. Yeah. This is more addressing that kind of self-brought anxiety or the dwelling on things that are not helpful. Mm-hmm. And this is redirecting that dwelling. And I think that's a really important disclaimer, Kyle, to bring up, that we're not saying that anxiety disorders or like clinical anxiety is not a real thing, because it absolutely is.
Sure. Yeah. Just want to make sure we touched on that because that's important.
Yes. So... what does this passage tell us about God? I am going to go first with this one. And the reason I'm going to share a story. The other day, as I've talked about before, my wife is pregnant, and this week she's 36 weeks pregnant. And a couple weeks ago, we went to the doctor. She went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you need to put the car seat in the car today, because you never know when this baby's going to show up. Mm-hmm. And at this point, I had so many responsibilities at church. I was doing the worship service. I was working on the mission stay. I was doing all this other stuff, a podcast and this. And, you know, it was just overwhelming. After the doctor said that, it almost scared me a little bit. Where
it probably should. Yeah.
Where it's like, you need to get your ducks in a row here, because this baby is coming whether you like it or not. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was really a struggle that evening, because I put the car seat in the car, and then I go in the house and I'm getting ready for bed. I get into bed and I can't fall asleep.
Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking about all these things, like I mentioned before, all these things that are just mounting up. And if I don't find a replacement for these things, nothing will happen. I'm laying in bed and I realize I need to pray. This verse comes over me and I start praying. Like verse 6 says, give everything to God through prayer and petition. And verse 7 immediately hits me with this peace that passes all understanding. And it's just incredible to see the power of God at work when we do what he says. I guess when I was praying, it wasn't immediate, but it just, over time, it's like talking to a good friend. It just releases that anxiety. And I was way less anxious than than I was. I was I was peaceful, and I fell asleep almost immediately after I got done praying. And it's just, it's just this idea of God. He knows what he's doing when he tells us to do these things. The Spirit is working when we do the things that God tells us to do.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful.
Well, and it tells me about God that God wants peace for us. He does. Like, not that everything in life needs to be perfect all the time, because that's not the same thing as peace. But that God does want peace for us. And, my favorite part, because this is one of my favorite verses too. My favorite part is how it describes this peace as something that surpasses all understanding. It doesn't make sense, and it usually doesn't, and that's like a cool part of it. But it mentions peace in verse 7, but it also mentions it in verse 9. After it lists all these things that we should dwell on, it says, when you do that and put them into practice, then the peace of God will be with you. So I'm also seeing, about God and kind of about us, like when we're feeling anxious, like the way out the way back to peace that God has provided is through going to him, but then also like refocusing our mind and our heart on some things that are just good for us, and I think that's really important to think about. That peace, sometimes you don't just get peace just by praying. Sometimes you also need to dwell on some things that are positive, and put those things into practice and change your life a little bit so that you won't be so anxious,
Right, and what's cool is that runs right into like modern treatment of anxiety, depression, is this redirection and focusing. It's not as simple as focus on the good, but that you can kind of boil it down to that. And Kyle, to your point, that acting these things out that are good helps. It's studied and proven that someone who is depressed, if they start focusing on helping other people, their depression will better. Maybe not entirely, it won't necessarily be cured, but because you're not dwelling on those anxieties and negative things, you're actually retraining your brain and your emotions to be more in line. And I love when that happens, that, things that are practiced secularly just align so perfectly with what God has said or what's been outlined and provided in Scripture. It's like this matches up, which tells me that, God was very intentional and he knows us. And he's tried to give us, through inspired text, like instructions on how to live.
Yeah, and it tells us something about people too, because like you can see all of this in the attitude that Paul describes later on down in verses 10 and following. For him, no matter what situation he's in, it's all about his attitude, his perspective is one of contentment, because he knows that his future hope is stored up in God. And so whatever circumstances he's going through, he's learning to be content, and that's obviously going to do a lot to his anxiety. I mean, the dude's in prison, right? And so I think a lot of times we allow circumstances to shape our emotional or mental reaction and also our spiritual, faith. But it shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't be governed by if things are going well or if things are going poorly,
Well, and piggybacking off of that, we talked about how this text is sometimes really misused or often. But another one is, when the Bible talks about not being tempted beyond what we can bear, and that's what leads to God will never give me more than I can handle, which I think is so misused all the time, that idea. Yeah. But I think that combined with this passage, it's saying, we can handle these things when we are with God and when we're reliant on him, that together we can work through this, whatever the situation may be.
Yeah, we have to be in fellowship with God. And I think, that's what this whole, prayer and petition, thanksgiving, like those aren't just, like lifeless actions. It's talking about this communal relationship, right, with God. And when we're practicing that, all of those things will flow naturally, and our anxiety naturally will diminish, because we start to see our life in perspective, whatever it is that's causing that anxiety. For me, a lot of the time, it's work and it's people. Like managing relationships, I feel is like a lot of my job, and that gives me anxiety because I care a lot about what people think about me, But when I can put things into perspective, it changes a lot about how I see things, and then it changes how I feel anxious or not.
Do you have anything else for what we learn about people? Because we kind of melded those two together.
I don't have anything else to add on that.
What has the Holy Spirit revealed to you in this passage that you will follow?
Yeah, for me, I think this passage I've always kind of broken up into 3 parts. You've got the rejoice and the anxiety part. You've got the whatever is pure part. And then you've got the Paul talking about being content. But something I'm really seeing, especially pairing like these first 2 sections together, is like, if I'm going to overcome anxiety, and again, we're not just talking about clinical stuff. We're talking about more about like the everyday anxiety. It should come with prayer and thanksgiving and that stuff, but it also needs to come from something that I'm working on, right? Like I need to dwell on things that are right and things that are lovely, things that are worthy of praise, and then I need to start emulating those things. And when I do that, like it's going to help whenever I'm feeling anxious, So like kind of bringing those 2 ideas together for me is something that I never really saw before, but they both talk about that peace. And I feel like peace is kind of the opposite of anxiety, right? And so if we're seeking peace, that's how we need to do it.
Yeah, to go along with that, I mean, there's this anxiety of life, and maybe I'm kind of being redundant here, but the anxiety of life builds up, and we need to cast that on God, give that to God and through prayer and petition, and then exactly. Instead of focusing on those things that bring me anxiety, focus on what the good things in that thing are. So the anxiety of putting on a worship service every week that takes me 20 hours to do, what are the good things that are coming out of that? Instead of this is super stressful, I'm struggling with this or whatever that is, what's true to God, what's noble, what is right, what is pure, what is lovely about those things. We're reaching the world, we're reaching people that we've never reached before, and that I tend not to focus on that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I need to turn my head, I guess, or my focus 180 degrees to focus on those things, because that will get me out of this, or help get me out of this and help give me peace.
I think a lot of times, like in moments of weakness, perhaps, like I think about like my anxiety is evidence of a lack of faith or something. Like if I could just trust God more, then I wouldn't have anxiety. And I mean, there might be something to that, but like I also think anxiety is just kind of a part of life. And the real question about one's faith is like, how are you going to respond to it? Are you going to succumb to it? Are you going to wallow in it? Are you going to let it eat you up and destroy you? Or are you going to, seek the peace of God in that moment? Because usually what I would do if I'm feeling anxious, I work harder or I avoid things. If I can't work my way out of the situation, I'll avoid it, until it's just really bad or it goes away. But those are like negative things that I would do instead of like seeking the peace of God, through these different ways.
Yeah, what's standing out to me is actually a little bit different than, I guess, our focus of the anxiety, but just, I love reading through Paul's letters. Really any of the letters, but in the Bible, but Paul's in particular, because he has these bits in there that are greetings, that are normal, kind of words of encouragement and acknowledgement to whoever he's writing to. That's more personal. That for the most part we gloss over because they're not the meat of the text, if you will. But in verse 10, he says, "I have great joy in the Lord because now at last you have again expressed your concern for me." And, he says, "And now I understand that you were concerned before. I just didn't know that, or you couldn't do anything." He goes on to say, he's like, "It's not even that I need it, but it's good to know." And then in verse 14, that little extra verse I accidentally tacked on, he ends his section with, "Nevertheless, you did well to share with me in my trouble." And I think that that's standing out to me because now we're still in this strange and unprecedented time of a pandemic. And, at least for me, sometimes I'll hold off on reaching out to people I haven't talked in a while because I'll think, well, I don't really have anything to say. I just thought of them. But this is just kind of a reminder that even that can be really important. Even just letting someone know, "Hey, I thought of you today," or "Hey, I'm wondering how you're doing," can be a huge encouragement. And so, in all of the context of our anxiety discussion, I suppose it's important. It links back to that in that you may be helping to alleviate someone else's anxiety by just that small thing.
I've heard that. Sorry to interrupt, but I've heard that before of people you know what? I was struggling. And you called at the exact moment I needed it.
Yeah.
And there's something at work there. So
yeah. Well, to me, what I hear you talking about is Paul's talking about community and the role that community plays in anxiety. And I think that's just really important to recognize that if we're feeling anxious and we internalize that or we keep it to ourselves, it's probably going to not go very well. But the more we share that kind of stuff with our community, the better. And it sounds like that's what they're doing here in Philippians. So kind of brings us to our last question.
Yeah, how can we have eyes to... Oh my goodness, let me start over. How can we have eyes to see opportunities to live it out now? For me, it's just... Man, this chair's squeaky. For me, it's just putting it into practice. Instead of forgetting about it and dwelling on all of that stuff for a long time, immediately turn to God in prayer. Instead of laying in bed for an hour and a half, not being able to sleep. For me, it's, whatever that is. And he doesn't just say, anxious, negatively. He says anxious positively as well. I'm anxious for this baby and I'm super excited. And I need to cast that on God instead of letting it build up in me and not being able to focus or do anything else. And I need to, that's for me, is just cast it on God immediately and then look at the positive of what the situation is calling, or look at the positive of the situation.
Yeah. I want to just tack on, because I think what you two have just said, Kyle, you talking about sharing in community, and then Sam, you talking about casting that on God. I think a lot of times when we think of casting our anxieties on God, we think, and then I don't have to deal with it anymore. I have sloughed it off. It's all over. But I think it's more of, obviously, you don't want to shovel off your excitement for your child. That's something you get to keep in part, right? It's just not supposed to prohibit you from being able to sleep or, function in your life. But I think that when we're talking about community, when we're talking about sharing with God too, it's that sharing the load aspect. Together we can do this, and it's shared. It makes it bearable. I don't know. I had to say that because I do think that, and I'm guilty of this too. I think often we think that it means if I still feel a little bit anxious or excited or whatever, then I haven't done it right. And it's well, no. It's just that we're supposed to be able to share it.
Mm-hmm. It's not like Paul, prays. He's nervous about going to prison, so he prays to God, and now it's oh, now I'm not in prison anymore. It's he still has to deal with life, but now it's oh, I'm in prison and I have peace. And I think for me, that's kind of what I'm seeing is I want to have eyes to see opportunities to seek peace, in myself, because I think if I'm operating more out of a place of peace, I'm probably going to be anxious less. And I wouldn't say I'm a super anxious person for the most part, like most of my anxiety again is around like relationships with people and like just trying to help people, and just having concern for people. I think all those things are good. But I think seeking peace is what I want to like look for in my life. And then putting that into practice also, not just in prayer, but in the rest of my life too.
Yeah.
So
I think for mine, and I kind of already touched on this, was that I really want to make sure that I'm seeking those opportunities and taking them to check in with others and to see how others are doing, because I feel in doing that, I'm both changing my focus to something that's good and focusing on, how I can support others, but also that, the importance of keeping those connections, especially right now, but all the time, really.
yeah. Well, we want to hear what you have to say, your thoughts on this passage or anxiety and those kind of things. We'd love for you to leave us a comment or something like that, or get in touch with us in any way that you can. We would love to interact with you in any way. Thanks, of course, for watching, and if you can share our videos with other people, we'd love that too. We're trying to, spread our message and our channel, so help us out. We're also trying to get to 100 subscribers by the end of the month or by the end of the summer. So help us out with that too. Make sure you're subscribed. Again, share it with friends and family and see if they'll subscribe too. That'd be super helpful to us. But for now, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week, and go live it out now.